It's January and I'm already 4 books behind my 2022 reading goal. So welcome to the January wrap up of 4 books, which is not that bad. On the one hand, I'm like, I don't want to pressure myself. I just want to read what I want to read when I want to read it. And on the other hand, I'm like, if I don't make it to 100 books this year, like the 7th year that I have made my target 100 books and like not hit it, I will be genuinely a bit embarrassed. And I know that numbers don't matter, but it's just something that I would like to do. And I thought I started off so well because I started the year with a very short book and I read it quite quickly and I was like, oh hello. Oh hello. And Goodreads told me I was ahead of schedule and I got a bit gassed, and then I fell off the wagon. But I have a couple of fun reading vlogs planned for February, so hopefully that'll like bump up the number. Like, who cares, but you know what I mean. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started with the books that I read in January. So my first book of the year was Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante, and I read this because I had seen the film at the BFI Film Festival in October and I completely fell in love with it. It was so good. And I wanted to show it to my mum because, you know, you wanted the meta 4D experience, like let's experience it with my mother and let's talk about it afterwards. So before that happened, I wanted to read the book just to like compare book to film, see what they'd done differently. And it was really interesting because in the book, it's set in, I think, Naples, and the main character is from there, and the family that she meets in the book are also from there, so they're all speaking Neapolitan, and she talks about their different dialects and their different backgrounds, whereas in the film, the main character, played by Olivia Colman, is from Leeds, and the family that she meets on this holiday in Greece is American. So immediately they've changed like the nationalities and the backgrounds of the characters. And I wouldn't say it makes a huge impact on like the story elements, but I just thought it was an interesting change. And I was thinking about, oh, is it because like foreign films are like less mainstream or like less seen at festivals or, you know, on general release? I'm not sure. Maybe because Maggie Gyllenhaal, who wrote and directed the film, is American, maybe she didn't feel like comfortable like portraying a sort of cultural and background that she's not from. But in the end, I think these themes are so universal and they speak to you no matter what your kind of cultural background or upbringing is, that I guess it doesn't really matter, but I thought it was an interesting change to observe. So in the story we're following Leda, who is a translator of poetry. She's very literate, she's very passionate, and she's on a sort of working research holiday when she encounters a young family with a young mother. And the more that Leda observes this young mother, Nina, and her young daughter, she starts to draw parallels to her own life, and she thinks back to the childhood and the, you know, growing up of her own kids, and you find out throughout the novel what her relationship with her own children is like, and then how that informs how she interacts with this stranger, this new woman that she's been observing on the beach. And I'm actually very impressed with how Maggie Gyllenhaal's managed to turn it into a film, because a lot of this novel is just very, very introspective. It's very stream of consciousness. You spend so much of the time in Leda's head, hearing her thoughts, hearing her backstory in her own words, and obviously in film it's a little bit clunky to have like a narration that's like, my name is her and I grew up here and that's why I feel like this. Obviously the book isn't written like that, it's a lot more elevated, but you know, in film you're kind of pushed for time and you don't want to have these long stretches of flowy narration, and I think Maggie Gyllenhaal did a really great job of, you know, verbalizing what isn't verbalized in speech in the novel. So obviously you're not going to go up to certain characters and just say what you think of them, but just through visual storytelling and through the actor's performances you really get a sense of like Leda and how complex she is, and her often disdain for other people, but how much she also cares and feels things so deeply. And there's an act that she commits in the novel that doesn't make any sense, and there's something else that she did in her life which I guess a lot of people would deem unforgivable. It's a very taboo thing, and I just thought that Olivia Colman played that role so well. And if you've seen the film and you enjoyed it and you want to kind of get more into her head and figure out like her motivations and the aftermath of what she did, Elena Ferrante goes into a little bit more detail in this book, and the language is just stunning. So I really enjoy this and I really recommend it. My next read of the month was The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anna Marie Crowhurst, and this is really not a book that I think I would have picked up on my own, really. I think I'd heard a couple of people on BookTube talk about it, and when Sylvia was doing an on-haul, I just said that I would take it because I was curious, because I'd heard really good reviews. But having looked at the sort of like synopsis and like the reviews and stuff, I don't know if I would have bought it myself, because it's like historical fiction, which is just not my jam usually. I usually am like, that's too dense for me. This is a standalone and the language is pretty accessible, it's not that dense. So I had a good time with it. So in this book we're following Ursula Flight, clearly, and she's growing up in 18 something, I think, in a 1664. And Ursula is born on the night of a bad luck comet, and she spends her whole life basically trying to evade this bad destiny that life has chosen for her, and the fact that her parents want her to just get married, stay at home, have a couple kids, as was what people did in the 1600s, but she dreams of being a playwright and moving to London and being on the stage and just a bigger life for herself. I'd say it's quite similar to Addie LaRue, just without the sort of magical curse demon aspect to that story. We're following a young girl who wants more than what she's been allotted in her life, and she fights to get that. And that's pretty much it, really. Like, it's a long book and I kept waiting for like something else to happen, because obviously in the blurb you're told that this girl is told to get married and she wants to do this instead. And the whole book is just her being told that she has to get married and like her pursuing this other thing instead. There's not really anything else that happens in the novel. It's quite slow in that respect, and it really stays with Ursula as she's writing play after play based on things that happen in her real life. And those extracts from her plays are in the novel and they are really fun to read. But ultimately it kind of reads as a little bit of a girl boss novel. I wasn't sure I was going to say that because it sounds really like reductive, but it is sort of that narrative of like, this girl is strong and cool and she's not gonna let anything get in her way. And I'm trying to think why like Addie worked for me so well, because I know a lot of criticism that's leveled at Addie LaRue is that, oh, she's not like other girls, like she thinks she's so cool and she deserves like this like grandiose life. And that sort of irritated me in this, where it didn't really irritate me in Addie LaRue, and I'm not sure why. I think maybe just I vibe more with Phoebe Schwab's writing style and like the magical element of that story and like the creativity element of that story. Like Addie wanting to make a mark, I found was just like a really beautiful allegory for like wanting to create, but then, you know, not feeling like you're seen properly to do so. Whereas this didn't have that sort of emotional level for me. I enjoyed it as like a fun historical romp and like seeing the historical setting and like they spoke in historical language, which I'm sure was like incredibly well researched, but it just didn't have that emotional connection for me, and I enjoyed it as like a fun adventure, but I doubt that I will come back to it for any reason in the future. But if historical fiction is your thing, I would recommend it because it's a well done version of that. I'm just not very well versed in the genre, so potentially it's not my thing, but I would recommend it if that is something that you think you would enjoy. And my next read of the month was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and I was so in the mood for a winter fantasy novel, and I had such a struggle with this, and I'm so sad about it. And I can't believe, right, that it's called Spinning Silver, and it only took me about 3/4 in and then reading someone else's Goodreads review to realise that it's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. How dumb, like how dumb could I be, really? It's called Spinning Silver. It's called Spinning Silver. So I'm going to try and explain this to you in a way that makes sense, but considering that I felt like I was too dumb for it a lot of the time. Wait, that's not even true actually. I wasn't too dumb for it. I understood what was going on. I had other issues. Gonna give myself some credit here. Okay, so here's what happens in the novel. We're following Miriam, who is the daughter of a moneylender, except her father doesn't like to collect his debts. He feels sorry for people who borrowed money and he lets them walk all over him while his family starves. And one day Miriam has enough and she kind of hardens her heart and she says, no, I don't want this life for myself, and she goes out and she collects on her father's debts. And by doing so she gradually grows their wealth to a point where they're comfortable and then sort of rich within the community. But this doesn't go unnoticed, and there are these creatures called the Starrick that live in this sort of adjacent winter kingdom. You're not really sure where they are, but there's this thing called the Starrick Road, which is how they enter like the mortal realm. And basically the Starricks come often and they rob the kind of richest people in a village and then burn it down, rape the women and like kill people and you know, peace out. So obviously they're not that great, and when Miriam starts to make a lot of money and she starts to get a little bit of notoriety in their village, in their community, she starts to get visited by one of the Starrick, and he sets her the challenge of turning a bag of silver coins into gold, and if she can't do it by the next meeting, I think she dies, and if she can, he'll set her some other task. So this happens 3 times, and each time she manages to turn the silver into gold, not in a supernatural way, just by like buying and trading and like being clever. And then as her reward for her gift, he marries her. He kidnaps her to the Winter Kingdom and marries her, and she's like the Stark Queen, and he wants her to like turn silver into gold for his kingdom, and like she should be honoured that, you know, her gift has been returned by his like willingness to marry her, because that's meant to be like a huge honour. So obviously Miriam is not too happy about being taken away from her family and just being exploited for her gift. So she's trying to leave and outsmart him and get back home. Concurrent to this, we're following Irina, who marries a Tsar who has this deal with a fire demon. And then concurrent to that, we're following Wanda, who is from Miriam's village and who is trying to escape her abusive father. And she knows Miriam because she is a working girl for Miriam's family, because her father did not pay his debts to Miriam's family. So we're following 3 girls. Each of them are trying to get away from their sort of abusive man in their life. Wanda trying to get away from her abusive father, Miriam trying to get away from the Stark King who's kidnapped her, and Irina is trying to get away from the Tsar who has made a deal with a fire demon for some reason. So yeah, there are a lot of plates in the air, and the perspective changed constantly. I think that's one of my biggest issues with like trying to get into the story, was because we'd spend time with a character, you get into their story, and then immediately the perspective will change, and you're trying to hold all this stuff in your head. And I think it wasn't helped by the fact that each thread is quite similar. Like, I think obviously that's on purpose. Like, these 3 girls have like the same motivations, they're all quite similar. They're trying to like overcome their circumstances, and I think it's meant to be uplifting that they all end up finding each other in the end and like relating to each other, and they all have the same struggle. But I think that led to it being a little bit repetitive in its themes and in the way that each section was written. I felt like there wasn't a lot of distinction between the narrative voice of Miriam, of Wanda, of Irina. They all felt kind of the same character, and it could just have been about one character, about Miriam trying to get away from the Stark King. I feel like that would have been a compelling novel in of itself. I don't think we needed so much the other 2 perspectives, because I think the idea was obviously to give them equal weight, but when they're all kind of the same and each of their arcs are the same, is it necessary? I don't know. And I really was slogging through it, and I felt bad because I was like, what isn't working for me? Like, it's a winter set fantasy, it has the vibes, it's a fairy tale retelling, I'm really enjoying like the setting, and I like the themes, I like the idea of, you know, being kidnapped by a mysterious king and she has to get out, and of girls triumphing over the powers that try to keep them down. So all the time I was like, what's not clicking? And I think I had a similar experience with Uprooted, where I was like, this is a fairy tale retelling, there's a magician, a wizard in a tower, and this young girl learning magic. What's not clicking? And maybe it is just the writing style. And I felt really rude saying that, because obviously it's very well written, it's an incredibly clever novel. It's a fantasy that obviously repurposes the story of Rumpelstiltskin, but it brings in this really interesting element of Miriam's family being moneylenders, and also them being Jewish, and how people have viewed their family because they're Jewish. And obviously there are these horrific stereotypes of Jews being obsessed with money and bad with money, and I think it was a really interesting angle on this story, and it really gave it something like I wasn't expecting. So I knew it was clever, and I knew it was well done, and I knew I respected it, but I just wasn't like as invested as I thought I should be, and I didn't know why. And I think maybe that is just the writing, and it's not badly written. That's why I feel really bad saying that, like, it's not badly written, but it just might not be for me. And I think that's what's confusing me so much, because I'm like, why isn't it for me? Like, why it should be for me? Like, I love fairy tale retellings, I love stories about young women and young girls. What isn't clicking? I just don't understand. So if this sounds like your kind of book, please go and read it, because I genuinely think like it's just a me problem. There's something, an issue with me, and it could just be the writing style, and I feel awful about it. I think I will know if I read The Last Graduate, which is Naomi Novik's Dark Academia novel, and I love Dark Academia, so if that one doesn't work for me, I'm like, okay, it's just her writing and I have to just deal with that. That's just a me thing. But yeah, I definitely recommend this if it sounds like your kind of thing. If you love winter fantasy, if you like fairy tale retellings, which I do, so why didn't I love it? But anyway, if this sounds like your kind of thing, definitely go read it, because I think it is very well done and I really, really respect it. But for some reason it just didn't emotionally connect with me. And on to the last book that I read in January, which was Beasts and Beauty, Dangerous Tales by Salman Chainani, and this, right up my street. You think you know those stories, don't you? You are wrong. You don't know them at all. A prince has a surprising awakening, a beauty fights like a beast, a boy refuses to become prey, a path to happiness is lost, then found again. These 12 tales of mystery, magic, and rebellious hearts breathe new life into old stories you thought you knew. Step inside them and you will see beauty and ugliness, birth and death, old age and youth, riches and poverty, love and bitterness. You will see power struggles, the search for justice, longing for acceptance and happiness. Step inside, but be careful, for not everything is what it seems. And if you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you will know that I love a fairy tale retelling, so I was very, very excited to read this. And this was a Christmas gift from my lovely friend Susie. Thank you very much. And I ended up really loving this, and I was worried at the start because it sort of skewed a little bit young. I read the first 2 stories and I was like, a little bit underwhelmed. I think the Snow White one in particular, I was like, just the way it was written. I thought it was like clever. I really liked what it was trying to do because it takes the idea of Snow White obviously being white, and it reverts that by making Snow White black, and the reason that she's cast out of the kingdom is because she is black, and it really threatens the reputation and the beauty of the stepmother. I thought it was a really interesting take on it. That's something I hadn't seen done in other retellings, but just the way it was written was a little bit girl boss energy, and I feel like, I hate that it's becoming a thing that I say, but it just irks me because I'm like, these characters are so interesting, and to just reduce them to like strong women is just a little bit reductive. But obviously it's a short story, so But there are other stories in here that I really love. For example, the take on Sleeping Beauty I thought was gorgeous, and that one is like a sort of very veiled allegory on queer love, and I thought it was just beautifully done. And we follow this boy in a tower who gets sort of nightly visits, and then he has these bite marks and bruises on his body, and it's sort of insinuated that he's getting, you know, nighttime visits, and he's not very interested in the girls that come to court. And obviously his family are very outraged by this, and they do everything they can to sort of keep this from happening. And that was just a take that I'd never ever seen before, and I thought it was really wonderful. It's a book that I think is aimed at children. I wasn't really sure because some of the stories are quite simple and like I said, a little bit reductive in the themes and like the way that they, you know, kind of hammer home those themes, whereas other ones are a lot more subtle and a lot more nuanced. So I guess it could still be for children, just some of the stories are better than others. So yeah, I really loved the Sleeping Beauty one. I really loved the Bluebeard one, and not a lot of fairy tale anthologies aimed at children include the story of Bluebeard. Obviously it's quite gruesome. So I thought it was a really interesting inclusion, and the way they did that one was interesting. And the Peter Pan one at the end was also really lovely. That was a really nice meditation on growing up and what it means to grow up, and the fact that Peter is actually the fucking villain of that story. Also, the Hansel and Gretel one was beautiful. I loved that one so much because it's set in a village called Bagapurana, which I'm not sure if that's a real place, but I think it's of sort of Indian origin, or it's suggested that's what it is, because they mention a lot of these like traditional sweets that just sound amazing, and the house in this story is made up of like traditional Indian sweets, not the kind of sweets that we're used to seeing in these stories, and they just sound amazing. Like they talk about like rose water and saffron. I was honestly like so hungry like reading the story. It was so good. Also the book is beautifully illustrated, so again, if you're hungry it doesn't help because you're like, I want the food. Like look at that, it's gorgeous, it's so pretty. So yeah, ultimately like any anthology, there were some stories that I really loved and really liked, and some stories that I liked less, as with every single anthology ever. That's just how it is. But the ones that I really loved obviously, so I would recommend it just purely based on that if you love fairy tales, and if you have, you know, children or like little ones who are kind of ready to get into like the slightly darker side of fairy tales, like more gothic, eerie side, and maybe they're a little bit older. I think this would be a great gift for them, or just adults as well who love fairy tales, because I just had a great time with this. The illustrations are gorgeous, and it has some really interesting takes that I hadn't seen before, and it's also a really diverse collection of stories, not just in gender and like gender swapping, you know, traditional gender roles, but also in, you know, decolonizing and like decentering whiteness in these stories and having them take place in different parts of the world and have people of colour within them. And I thought that was really important for, you know, children who are reading it to see themselves in these stories in different roles than they traditionally inhabit in like the mainstream. So it was a really wonderful addition to like the retelling canon, and I'm very excited to put it on my collection and read just more books like this. I love fairy tales and I love retellings, and I also really want to read Solomon Chinani's The School for Good and Evil series, because that has been on my TBR and my radar for the longest time, and after having read and loved this, I think it's just going to be very good. So there we have it. Those are all the books I read within the month of January. I think it was a pretty good start to 2022. I enjoyed myself and I'm excited to read some more books. obviously. So do let me know what your favourite book of January was, and if you've read any of the books that I've talked about today and what your thoughts were. I would love to know. And I will see you very soon with another video soon.